My name is Emily Birks, and I am one of the customer success managers here at Appraisd. And I'm joined by our customer success lead, Richard Brereton.
Hello.
And our CEO, Roly Walter.
Hello.
Today, we're going to delve into the topic, how to get your employees engaged with performance management. So we've gathered some interesting insights from our first in-person community event, which took place back in March, where we were joined by some of our wonderful clients and our Appraisd team members. And we thoroughly enjoyed that experience, meeting our clients face-to-face, delving into this topic, but it also gave our clients the opportunity to meet us and know that we are real humans, and also to meet one another and to appreciate that there are other clients who work with us who are facing this same sort of obstacle of trying to really ensure that employees are getting engaged with performance management.
Exactly. It was great fun. So thanks to everyone. If there's anyone on the line at the moment who came along, thank you for coming. It was great to have you, and thanks for contributing your thoughts, which are feeding into this event that we're doing right now. And please, to everyone, please do come along to these events in future. Now, if you're a client of ours, you'll immediately have access to the Appraisd Community event. So we'll be doing more. They tend to be in London, but we try to kind of follow up with a webinar like this so that our international clients can access the information too. But please do come, it's great fun. And also non-clients are welcome too as well to come and meet us.
Yep. And there we did a write-up of that event, which will there'll be a link to that in the chat shortly. And as Roly said, we'll be delving into more detail over what was covered on the event and also our thoughts and reflections on it following the event. But I will talk a bit more at the end of the session about the Appraisd community and other things that we have coming up.
Wonderful, perfect. So today, the topics that we're going to cover are common mistakes that can damage employee buy-in, how to help employees engage with performance management, and lastly, how can you gather honest feedback on your performance management process to improve it. During the webinar, please feel free to ask any questions. You can either ask it within the chats functionality, but there's also a little tab where you can click questions and you can type in your questions there. And during the webinar, we can answer those questions, but also we will give time at the end to answer any of your other queries. So firstly, the first topic that we wanted to delve into were firstly the common mistakes that damage employee buy-in. So here we just really want to talk about what you can do wrong that can really turn people off, and sort of trying to avoid these and how to really sort of go about improving these. So firstly, Richard, I know you've got one of the insights for us.
Yes. So one of the main things that came up repeatedly and that we see people falling into the trap of is including too much in review forms, and particularly things that just aren't that relevant. So couple of ideas is either sort of keep the form as lean as possible. People are going to get slightly disinterested if they feel they're answering questions that are not particularly relevant or don't have that much application to their role. So you could consider cutting them out completely, or consolidating a few questions into a single question. If I think Roly will mention something about this later on, but if you're analysing your response of your reviews and people have just put C above or as above, it's a pretty good indication that you've got some redundant questions in there. Long forms, again, something that tend to put people off. People are very busy, and rightly or wrongly, some people do view performance reviews as an administrative task, and we'll talk a bit more about how to change that perception later on. But people are very busy, and they're having to take time out of their work day and meeting their targets and day-to-day work in order to fill out reviews. So make it as lean as possible, make it as relevant as possible, and also consider flexing things throughout the year. So don't necessarily have the same conversations over and over again throughout the year. Tailor them at different points, and you might consider obviously you probably want to talk about objectives in each of the reviews throughout the year because they're the fundamental thing that people are working towards. But at mid-year, you may want to focus a bit more on a career conversation. At the end of sort of Q3, you might want to talk a bit about well-being or work-life balance or things like that. So rather than just doing a rinse and repeat of the exact same form over and over again, change things up so that A, it keeps things interesting, and B, you're able to cover a broader range of topics throughout the year without cramming them all into a single form that takes hours and hours to go through.
Yeah, actually, just on that point, you made me think of a client of ours who has a kind of 6-month cycle of monthly check-ins, and each check-in has a different topic. And that means that you kind of cover each topic twice a year. So that could be 1 month it's career conversations. Next month it's getting some 360-degree feedback. The month after that it's about your objectives perhaps. And yeah, that just makes sure that you're breaking up what used to be in the bad old days of the big annual appraisal, into much more kind of manageable chunks that are at the appropriate cadence for individuals to be kind of talking about those things. So yeah, some interesting creative stuff from one of our clients there.
Yeah, and I did have a client of mine who did do a sort of quarterly cycle, and every single review was similar, and the engagement throughout the year decreased. But from there, they then updated and changed those touch points throughout the year with different kind of conversations, different focus points, and that got people re-engaged because they felt there was a lot more relevance, and also they didn't feel like they were just doing a tick box. These were real questions that were being presented to them that were not as familiar every time. So it's quite good just to keep it fresh and not sort of repeat it as much.
Yep. Okay. So another thought I had on this topic, well, I think it came up during the community event, was essentially don't assume that people know how to have the conversations around all of those topics. So maybe you put a lot of time and effort into developing a really interesting set of prompts or questions for those different points in the year that you think are right, whether it's a career conversation, or perhaps it's about performance, or perhaps it's about planning for the future, or perhaps it's about learning development. Each of those are a slightly different conversation, and people may not have had training on those, in which case I'd recommend getting some. We actually encourage embedding e-learning into Appraisd if you have some. So if you've got any kind of a course or a video or any kind of relevant content that you can embed into the review form, so much the better. So when it comes around to having, let's say, a career conversation, there's a little video, a bit of content or something like that that the manager and the employee can use to refresh their memory on how this conversation should go, and they can also sort of get help from somebody else in advance if they need to.
Yeah, sorry, Emily, you go ahead.
I had a client of mine who was really clever with in their review. They did actually, you can in Appraisd, you can actually hide specific sections if you want to from the appraisee, and they did a manager section that just had helpful questions that could ensure that the manager's asking the right questions and trying to ensure those good conversations are happening, which was just really useful way for managers to just take a look. What kind of questions should I be asking during the sit down to really instigate these conversations that will bring value to the employee and also to the manager, which I thought was a really great idea.
Yeah, and there's many facets to a good performance management process. Obviously, we are a performance management software provider and talk a lot about the benefits of software and making things easier. But software is not just a silver bullet on its own. It's not, you can't just roll out the software, give people forms and just let them go and expect them to be really good managers and have really effective performance conversations. They do need support and guidance, whether it's training or e-learning, as Roly mentioned. But don't just give them a form and expect them to be able to become brilliant managers overnight. They may need a bit more support than that.
Absolutely. Another point that we came across during the in-person community event was just discussing about feedback, implementing feedback, and actually having feedback within your culture. As we said, don't think just because you ask people to give regular feedback that they will do it. So one, we said, provide guidance and training on how to do it, but also something that we found quite useful, which Appraisd can do, is that you can offer ad hoc feedback to your peers, but also you can draw in that ad hoc feedback into the review itself, and you with your manager are able to then review that feedback and have conversations about that feedback that you've been offered in those 6 months, in that year. And then hopefully that can encourage more peer-to-peer feedback, because that feedback is actually being reviewed and actually being discussed with your line manager, and it is being acknowledged rather than it's just sitting there and not being spoken about. And that's, I think, really, really useful and beneficial to the employee and the manager.
Yeah, and I think going back to the training point we were talking about before, feedback is quite an emotive topic. And if you're in an organization that doesn't have a history of doing feedback, and there isn't a culture of continuous feedback, it's something that can be challenging to bring in, and people can be a little bit reticent about if I give sort of constructive criticism, will it be taken in the right way? People may not have the experience and skills in how to constructively write that feedback so that it is actually positive and allows people to grow and develop. So I think something that's really important is giving people guidance either within the feedback templates or training on both how to give and how to receive feedback constructively and assume positive intent.
Nice one. Yep.
And what else? Another thought of yours, Richard. What else did you take from your group from our?
Yes, so this one is, it's obviously performance management traditionally sits within HR as an HR administered process, but I think we all can fall into the trap of thinking HR are the owners of the process, whereas in fact HR should act as the facilitators of the performance management process and actually give some of the ownership over to employees and managers. If your staff are going to truly buy into it, they need to feel invested in the process. Obviously, there will always be corporate elements to performance management processes. There may be bits of information that you need to capture, or ratings that everybody needs to be evaluated against across the board. But you need to balance that out with elements of the process that employees and managers truly feel benefits them. So and you can't just play lip service to it. So don't have questions in there around what are your career aspirations if you have absolutely no intention of doing anything with the responses. That's probably going to put people off even more. So if you want people to engage, find out what's important to them, incorporate that in the process, and then make sure you close that feedback loop. So someone may say, right, I want to become a manager in the next 6 months. They may not be ready, so you be open and candid with them and say, look, I know you want this, you're not quite ready at the moment, but let's work with you to develop your skills in area X, Y, and Z, and then once you've done that, let's have another conversation around your readiness for this. Also, if people express sort of career aspirations that you can meet, do your best to do it rather than just saying yes, 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 and sort of don't do anything about it at the end. That, as I said before, that's going to put people off more than not even having the conversation in the first place. The other element of it, and we'll talk about this later on, is include employees and managers in the design of the process as well. So an idea is have some employee steering groups with people representing different parts and different levels of the business, and ask them what they would feel valued, what they would feel are areas that they want value from performance management. What would they like to see included in the process, and balance out the corporate parts of the process with things that are really designed around what your staff are expecting and needing.
And I think that'd be very impactful. Wonderful. Well, we just sort of gone through the sort of common mistakes, but we just want to now go into our big topic, unless there's anything else that either of you want to bring to that section.
No, I think that's good. I think we've done the don'ts. Don't do this, don't do that. Let's we move on to the do's.
How to do it, yes. So our second topic is really how to help employees engage with performance management. So we're just going to go through some of the insights that we took from our community event and just delve into those a little bit further. So firstly, Richard, any good sort of insights that you can bring?
Yes, so I talked a little bit earlier around flexibility throughout the year and having different reviews at different times. But another thing is be flexible for the context of the people being managed. So the role that an entry-level graduate is doing and how they need to be evaluated and managed is going to be very different to somebody in a manager or strategic leadership level. And the questions and the tone of that conversation can be very different. It's no good having a form that goes through strategic leadership and how to manage teams, and having questions on that for a form that is being used by frontline staff, and conversely, having maybe a very sort of binary conversation around sort of metrics and sort of granular performance targets might not be right for someone operating at a more strategic level where they are focusing on the medium and long-term vision of the company. Equally within the business as well. So you've got all business have very different departments, and a conversation for someone in sales, which is most likely going to be focused around targets and pipeline and sales funnel and all those sort of metrics based conversations and sort of data driven performance management, is going to be very different to somebody who is working in customer support or maybe in a creative team where it might be more around values and behaviors rather than financial targets. So don't try and fall into the trap of having a single form that works for everybody and is easy to administer because you just have the one or two forms, but consider having forms that are very relevant to particular roles or particular types of people, so that they're not having to wade through questions that are not particularly relevant, and everything in that form is directly focused to what they're doing, and they can see why they're being asked to provide a self-assessment, for example, against those particular areas.
Yeah, totally agree. You just made me think of something which is about the desire to obtain consistency in the process and the templates and everything. And if we're talking about a large international company with offices all around the world, lots of different departments, different job types and roles and so on, then it can sometimes feel overwhelming if you're in headquarters trying to organize all of this. And there's a kind of temptation to try and just get consistency globally, because that suits you and communications. It makes life easier. However, we have come across examples. We worked with one large multinational company that tried to do this, and they very quickly discovered that the office in Japan, actually, they had a fantastic process, a workflow, a template that really worked for them. It was completely different to the one they had in San Francisco. They were able to get them all onto the same platform, all onto Appraisd, which made the management easier, but it also allowed actually to have those regions do their own personalization. And what it means is that it's just so much more valuable for those employees who are, the users who, and the workflow works for them. So it's not just about the templates, but it's also about the process. Whether it's you meet monthly or quarterly, or there's monthly meetings plus a big annual review or a biannual review, versus something completely different. And all of these components can be configured differently for different parts of the organization. And in my view, it's right to do that, and the system should obviously help you manage that complexity.
And absolutely, being presented with the right kind of questions that are relevant to you will help and keep engagement, because people really do feel that, one, they're being listened to and they're being asked the right questions. And if they feel that they have questions that are irrelevant, they're more likely to skim through the review thinking, this doesn't make sense, I don't understand why. And they'll probably skip out questions that actually are valuable and that are more relevant to them, because they feel they're disengaged quite quickly and think, I don't understand why I'm having these questions, I don't really benefit. They might add maybe a few sentences, but not giving the time to delve into those questions further, because they just don't feel it's relevant enough. So just keeping that engagement up, really ensuring they feel that it's relevant to them.
Yeah,
okay, so
that leads quite nicely into I think a point you're going to talk about, Roly, which is on the structure of review. So the structure is almost as important as the content. So I think you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah. So one of the things, well, just on the questions there, often in performance reviews or career reviews, we see people inputting in their competency framework, and that's absolutely great if you've got a good one. But we have often seen where the competencies they don't accurately reflect what the organization really values in that role. So, for example, you might find sales competencies that value all sorts of skills, and particularly soft skills, when actually everybody knows deep down that it's the billable hours or the deals that were brought in that actually make up 80% of the of the performance and what's important to the company. And so I think it's really important for companies to be totally honest about that and say, actually, this is really where we place the value. Or if you do, as a company, value let's to take that example, you really value the so-called soft skills equally, as much as you value the revenue that's being brought in, then you've got to be really explicit like that and make sure everybody understands that and really appreciates it and believes in it and says, yes, okay, I get it. If we develop these skills, it will make us stronger as a whole and bring in more revenue over the longer term. So I think it's really important to be honest about that. The other thing I was going to say is about ratings. And I know that often when we ask managers, what is it that you find really painful about performance reviews? It's the ratings, and they hover over the 3 or the 4 or the 2, and they're not quite sure which one to give, and that can take them a really long time. It just feel like perhaps it doesn't quite represent their thoughts and the nuance of everything. And so what we're seeing is a lot of clients are taking their ratings out where they can. Now, of course, this is very difficult if you've got lots of other processes that rely on ratings, such as compensation management and so on. And so we are seeing people taking the ratings out. Or here's an alternative idea, and one of our clients did this as well, which I thought was a great idea, was to have a quarterly review, and the competencies section was optional. And so what this means is you go through the quarterly review and you talk about the progress that you've made, the plans that you're making for the future, any development that you need, and all of that, get feedback on how you're doing. And then the competencies are there if you would like to have a slightly more structured conversation about career development. And so it was less of a, right, once a year, everyone gets assessed on their competencies. Instead, it was more of a, okay, I'm an employee, I want to get ahead, I'm aspirational, I would like to know how I'm doing, and I'm going to almost invite my manager to make an assessment using the competency framework to make sure that these are about relevant skills, not just my manager's kind of general thoughts. And you're sort of giving license to the manager to make that assessment, which makes it much more of a positive conversation. So the manager can say, well, look, overall, but, I think this is the one that needs a bit of work in order for you to get to the next level. So there are other ways of structuring the reviews that make it a much more kind of user-friendly and lighter process for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And I think on that structure as well, it's, if there are things that are more important than others, put them at the beginning. Cover the really important things first, because naturally people will get fatigued the longer that they're working on something. So when they're coming at it fresh, put the important things at the top. An example of that is one of our clients focuses a lot on sort of in-year agile management of objectives. So for them, they do have ratings at the end of the year, but a lot of that is based on how have you performed against your objectives, which are tied to the overall business goals. And they have a number of sort of self-reflective questions around how have you performed in your work. So they put the objectives right at the top. So everybody reads through, let's have a look on all my comments back on objectives for the past year. So now I've got all of that information and I can go straight into answering the questions about sort of general performance. So I think the structure and the flow of the form is really important.
And talk about the structure and flow, also something I highly recommend if you have the time is to actually test the workflow and the structure. And so experience it as an employee and a manager. Either you can do it as yourself, so you can view as either, and really feel the flow and see how it feels for the employee and for the manager, or just test it with a colleague, because even though when you've written it all out and you feel like it's appropriate, it makes sense, actually experiencing it yourself, you'll start realizing actually this doesn't quite work, or we don't need that question. So I always recommend, if you have the time, is to practice it and go through it just to see if it works.
Totally agree. And if you're an organization that's coming from a paper-based system, so perhaps it's Google Docs or Word Docs or PDFs or whatever, in the old days, or if you were using Word, the way of making sure that the right people see those documents is to have a sort of workflow that you put on the top of the document, and it says, you know, once the manager's done this, then they need to send it to this person by email, then they need to send it to that person, and then there's sign off, and then it goes back to the employee, and so on. And actually, the temptation when moving onto a platform like Appraisd is to recreate that completely, because everybody's familiar with it. However, when you use a system like Appraisd, you often don't need those extra steps, because people can access the reports at any time they like, and so people can take so you can sort of remove these gates. You know, manager's got to sign off, then someone else, and then somebody else. And actually, what you can do is take a much more sort of optimistic approach, which is where just leave the employee and the manager to get on with it, and then you, as the manager's manager, can do spot checks. You can review those reviews anytime you like, just by navigating into the system and finding them. And you place this emphasis on people are probably going to do the right thing, so let's let them do it, and we'll just occasionally check and review things are going well, rather than having to have sign off at every stage, which can really kind of add a lot of friction to the process.
I think particularly in businesses where they have maybe a department head acting as a sign-off and they're required to be in the process, they just have, I mean, they're busier people as it is, and then you're expecting them to actually take action on 40 plus reviews in order to close them down. And we see one of the single causes of reviews not being closed is senior leaders being expected to do too much admin for reviews. The more steps you have, the more potential points of failure there are, but also if you've got someone who's not only having to review their own team, but is then having to read the reviews and actively sort of sign off and close them for an additional 30 or 40 people, it's and all at the same time, usually coming towards year end when it's particularly busy. Is it really a surprise that some of that admin doesn't get done and you end up chasing people and having reviews that are overdue?
Absolutely. And then one last point that we did discuss quite a lot at the community event was objectives, because that's obviously can be a big driver for businesses, and trying to get that engagement was actually linking the employees' objectives with the business objectives. And this transparency is really beneficial because, one, the employee feels valued, that they are being entrusted to know more about the business, but also they can feel that they are part of a wider purpose. So if I can input my objective and I can see it aligned to something bigger, I feel that actually my work is contributing to a larger purpose and the success of the business, which I think will and can really engage employees from just updating objectives and seeing how they feel they're going and how far they are in achieving that objective, which will then apply to something even bigger.
Absolutely. Yep. I think, you know, Appraisd is often used as the communications tool for reiterating the messages from the senior leadership team around those corporate objectives. And of course, that team will be presumably standing up and talking about them in town hall events and updating through newsletters and so on. But actually, logging into a system frequently and seeing those top level objectives linking to yours is a great way to get people to really engage with the process and understand how everything connects together, and understands why you in HR have invested in this, and why everyone believes it can be really kind of transformative to the business.
And it's also helpful for employees to understand why they're being asked to do what they're doing. So if you've been set this objective or been asked to focus on this particular area, why are you doing that? And I speaking for myself, and I've spoken to other people who feel the same, that if you understand your role in the overall strategy and how you can help move things forward, it gives a lot more clarity and a lot more sort of purpose in terms of what you're doing. So make it as easy as possible for people to understand why they fit in, and be as transparent as possible where possible. Obviously, there will be things that sort of strategically sensitive things that you can't communicate at certain times, but wherever possible, be as candid and as transparent as possible. And if people ask questions, either give them the answer or explain to them why it may not be possible to give them that information at the same time. Don't just try and fob them off. Treat your staff like adults, and be as honest as possible, and you will get that in return.
Absolutely agree with that point.
Nice one. Yep.
Wonderful. And final topic that we would like to just discuss is how can you gather honest feedback on your performance management process to improve it? Being open to being flexible and updating your process and gaining knowledge from employees and managers who experience the process on a yearly basis really can be the best people to ask. And so I'm going to start again with you, Richard. Any sort of insights that you can bring to that topic?
Yes, so we've seen loads of different approaches to this, and what works really depends on your culture, what people are used to, and what's going to be the most frictionless way of gathering feedback on the process. So it's really important, obviously, to design a good process, but don't get overconfident. Once you've designed it, think, right, I've done this. This is going to be good for years. We've seen, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, how quickly things change with lockdowns and recessions and all sorts of things. And businesses are having to be very agile and nimble and evolve strategies and focuses quite quickly. So there's a good chance that you're going to have to evaluate your and evolve your people strategy to match the changing business environment. So also get feedback from your staff on what's important to them. Just because something was important at one point doesn't mean it's going to continue to do so, to be so, 18 months down the line. So a couple of different forums that you could consider. Employee focus groups, you may have these already. If you do, that's probably a good way to gather feedback. You can gather feedback via Appraisd or other platforms such as sort of Typeform, SurveyMonkey, if people are used to using those. As I said before, use the thing that people are used to using. It's one fewer tool for people to have to learn how to use and reduces that friction. You could have, as Roly mentioned, sort of town halls and really get people all in a room and giving feedback that way. But you could also have a sort of anonymous suggestions box. So some people may feel more comfortable giving anonymous feedback or anonymous suggestions on what can be incorporated or changed in the process. So have a think about what your employees, your employees best. You will know what they're most likely to engage with, and design a feedback process that is as easy as possible for them to engage with.
Yeah, I think you just reminded me that I think we've actually got a template that we can offer to people
Yes.
On the line who want to get feedback. And the sort of questions that we want to ask are, how important is it to you to get this kind of feedback from your manager, or what's sort of ideal frequency of check-in for you? Yeah. And those things could be different for different people. And again, there's an opportunity to do personalization there. But if anyone would like to get hold of that, then let us know. One thing to add to that is that you can often, some of our clients like to add an extra question on the end of their review forms. It just asks those questions and tries to get feedback on the process itself. So just once you've had your review form, a quick question just on how did you find this process, anything you'd improve about it, let us know. And the more that you request feedback from the users, the employees and managers, the more you act on it, then the more seriously they'll take the process, and the more they'll feel like this is not just a process imposed on them by HR, but really HR, like you said, Richard, are facilitating the continuous evolution of a process that is built by and serves the employees and managers.
Yeah. And another great source of feedback is employees that are leaving the business. So many businesses do exit interviews where there'll be questions around sort of how satisfied were they, could they have been sort of managed better. Consider asking questions in that exit interview about what they directly thought about the performance management process. Someone that's leaving a business generally doesn't have any reason to not be candid and hold back. They're leaving. So use this as an opportunity to ask them, in what areas did you get value from the performance management process? What was missing and what didn't work, or what would you like to see changed? And consider feeding that back into your process. They're a very, very good resource to get honest feedback on all sorts of things.
And even though obviously exit interviews, as you mentioned, you can't really help that employee anymore, they're gone. Obviously you can help employees that are still there, but also something that was interesting that came up was stay conversations. So these are actually conversations that can happen between an employee and their line manager, or the employee, and it could be someone in HR or L&D or something like that, where stake conversations can be very focused on maybe your career aspirations. It could be on your personal development. You can call stake conversations something different if you want to, but that is also an opportunity for you to actually ask an employee who's currently working with you, do they feel that the process is currently benefiting them? Can they see value in it at the moment? Are the right conversations being presented to them, or the right questions? Do they feel that there's any value? I feel that stake conversations, or those conversations that are happening with employees within the business, would be extremely beneficial, because they might not be as maybe potentially as candid, but if you try and make it as relaxed as possible and say, look, this is just us trying to learn from you, we really need that feedback, we want it to benefit the business, getting that feedback from employees during the time of their employment is fantastic. And then if you can then act on it and those employees can see that then being implemented, that's a big win.
That's a really good point, that just on the end there, that if you are going to get the feedback, you have to say what you're going to do with it. You have to do something about it. And it may be that you get 100 pieces of feedback and you can only really action 3 of them. That's fine. And, I think it's perfectly okay to say that we've got tons and tons of feedback. We've got loads of good ideas. Here are all the ideas. But really, realistically, we've only got the capacity or the ability or the money or whatever it is to do these 3. So we're going to focus on those now. We'll ask you again in 6 months' time, and we'll see what we can do there. But the idea that in the spirit of an evolving agile process, you can't do everything at once. You really just need to tackle the priorities. But yeah, being honest and saying that realistically we're not going to be able to tackle those issues for a while, I think is perfectly fine and gives people faith that at least the most important things will be responded to.
Definitely. And Roly, I think you've got one more point at which we recommend getting feedback from staff. But just before you do that, on the topic of gathering information from employees, something that we've seen work really nicely for a few companies, and it's along the veins of feedback but slightly different, is providing a form and a template for asking employees how they like to be managed, how they like to be coached, how they like to receive feedback. That's invaluable information that you can then provide managers, that allows them to sort of tailor those conversations and ensure that whilst you may have the same form for all the people doing a similar role, the manager might be able to then tailor the way that they fill out that form or provide feedback to an individual to maximize its impact.
Great. Yeah, my final point was just going to be around another good opportunity to ask for feedback. That's totally a kind of really natural point, which is a short while after an employee has joined the organization. Is a really good time just to say, okay, what were your expectations, and what's the reality? How does it compare to what your expectations were? How did you find your probation review? Is this sort of something you expected? Did it go as well as you'd imagine? How did it work at your previous organization? And this doesn't have to be a formal process. It's simply going up to that person and just having a quick chat and just get a feel for the impressions of a new starter, because I think it's a really useful indicator of probably how everybody else feels or will feel.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point there, Roly, on the sort of more casual conversation. So don't feel that you have to engineer all of these things into the process as formal, almost like admin tasks for people to do. Just conversations over a coffee machine, or people mentioning things to their manager, just sort of keep your ear to the ground and take on board just the general sort of perception that you're hearing about various processes, and consider acting on those.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Well,
sorry, Emily, we've got a question.
Yes, I saw. Yes, go, Roly, go.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want you to miss it.
No, it's all right.
Okay, so the question is, would you recommend building exit survey forms into Appraisd? Do either of you want to take that question? Richard?
I can jump in. Yes. Yes, is the short answer. We've seen it work really well for people, but I suppose it depends on depends on your business and what you want out of those. So whilst we can have different visibility permissions for those exit interviews for normal reviews, and that can work really nicely, so we could have a review just between an employee and HR that the manager doesn't see. But on the flip side, I can understand that there may be employees that would hesitate to engage with an exit interview form in the same platform as they are having conversation with their managers, particularly if they maybe had a not the best working relationship with the manager. So I say yes, we've seen it work really well for loads of people, but consider whether there are other factors that may cause people to engage with it less because it's in the same platform as their performance management. But in general, I say yes, but there are exceptions.
Yeah, me too. I would say go for it. The review itself, the exit interview, could obviously be with somebody else, could be with someone from HR. Certainly that was my experience at my last exit interview, which was in 2002, a long time ago. And I really appreciated having the exit interview. I was asked to prepare in advance, which was really good. I don't remember if I typed into a system or not, probably not. But having a structure to that exit interview with the data stored in Appraisd, I think is fantastic. Yeah, the review could be with somebody else, not your manager. That's fine. But just having all of that data in a single place means that you can report on it, you can find trends and all of those other benefits. So I would encourage you to go for it. And if you're using Appraisd, do have a chat with your customer success manager to talk about visibility, who can see what, and we can make sure that that's all sorted for you.
Yeah, I remember my last one, which I remember sitting down. It's probably not quite as far long ago as yours, Roly, but probably in the last sort of 7 or 8 years, where sort of sat down with HR. They filled it out with a pen on a piece of paper, and then that went into a file. And I think they probably then typed up some responses into a spreadsheet or somewhere. So you're even just removing half an hour plus of admin work for HR every single time someone leaves. You can quite quickly stack up the benefits in terms of cost saving of doing it in a system like Appraisd.
Wonderful. Jake says, thanks for the response. Makes sense. That's great. Any other questions or queries? Please do send them across. We've got time to answer them. And during that time, I'll be sending those questions. Rich is just going to tell a little bit more about the community. And if there are any questions, we'll answer them post.
Great. Thanks, Emily. So, as we alluded to at the start, we launched the Appraisd Community with a sort of face-to-face event in London, probably about 6 weeks ago now, I think it was. It was really great to see everybody. And the idea behind the Appraisd Community is to bring people together, give information around more things around the sort of performance management process, but also give people the opportunity to learn from each other, meet each other, and we will be having a number of different sort of types of content that we'll put out through the community. So there'll be webinars such as this one, face-to-face events, as we mentioned before. We're just in the early stages of discussing what our next face-to-face event is, so stay tuned. But also some sort of bite-sized sort of product style webinars. So we had our inaugural Appraisd Experts webinar last month, and they will be every sort of 1 to 2 months going forward, and they will delve into more sort of in-depth advanced bits of functionality in the Appraisd platform. So we did one recently around the whole area of calibration. So for those of you that do ratings at the end of the year that are tied to bonus or compensation plan, any of that sort of thing, it's a pretty hot topic, and we see a lot of people doing those. So we'll delve deep into sort of advanced areas of process and how that could work. There'll be webinars coming out. Oh, I said webinars, sorry. Newsletters coming out with information on all of this stuff. So as Roly said, that will go to all of our clients as standard. But for any of you that are on this webinar that are not clients, please just let us know if you'd be interested, either in here, or we will be sending an email out with recordings, so you can we'll put a contact address on there. So it's not just limited to Appraisd clients. Anybody is welcome, and we have a lot of other ideas for the Appraisd community, so keep an eye out, and we will have more announcements over the next few months.
Nice one. Yeah, and it's not just about the expert series, not just about us being experts. The idea is that you guys become experts, and
Yes.
we love this idea that our customers kind of gradually go through this sort of course and become experts. And we were thinking maybe if we get people to become true expert by attending, a certain number, we'll give them one of our new Appraisd hoodies or something like that. Anyway, we'll think of something.
On the topic of customers, our next webinar is on the 24th of May at 11 o'clock UK time with Amira Kohler, our Director of Performance and Change, and Shona Harding from Natterbox. The webinar they're doing is on what, if anything, gets senior leaders excited about measuring performance. So that'll be a really fascinating conversation and a pretty hot topic, and something that we're hearing a lot of people talking about at the moment. So that will be fascinating. So there will be details of that in the chat as well. So we'd love you to join us for that as well.
Absolutely. And Shona's one of our clients, so it's really, really great to have a webinar with her joining. So we really look forward to it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have found these insights useful. You will all receive an email in the next few days with the recording of our session, alongside the link to our webinar that's happening on the 24th of May. So if you would like to register, just wait for that email and you're able to, or the link will be added on the chat in a minute. Also, just please feel free to reach out to your own customer success manager if you would like to discuss how best to improve employee engagement within your own organization. Myself, Richard, and Roz would be more than happy to jump on a call and delve into that further and see what we can do to support you in improving or increasing that engagement. Wonderful, amazing. Well, thank you both for joining. It was lovely that you were able to join today, and we hope to see you on the next one. So have a wonderful afternoon, morning, or wherever you are.